think we're going to go ahead and get started. Well, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to Talk's latest webinar, which is Cultivating Restaurant Staff Wellbeing. To our existing customers, we're really thrilled to have you here with us. Thank you. And for those joining us that aren't familiar with our platform, thank you for spending this time with us. Talk was built by restaurants for restaurants, and it offers the perfect blend of technology and hospitality. We offer flat rate subscription pricing, zero per cover fees, and we have the industry's lowest no-show rates. Best of all, you can manage everything from reservations to events, experiences, and takeout. Just think of Talk as your ultimate sales engine, allowing your business to drive revenue by hosting outstanding hospitality experiences. It's funny, most of our team has actually worked either in hospitality or alongside hospitality for a number of years. I believe we did the math once, and we have accumulation of just over 500 years of experience between all of us. So we definitely get that to run a better business in restaurants, one that has staying power, we really need to ensure that the atmosphere is a sustainable one and that we're taking care of ourselves in the process. Before we get to our introductions, I do want to call attention to the question answer feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, just go ahead and place your questions there, and we will have time to address them at the end, or otherwise, a team member will respond directly to you in the chat. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Sabrina Medora, and I am the Content Program Manager here at Talk. Prior to Talk, I was working as a food writer for publications like Eater, Plate Magazine, Food and Wine. I've also worked in the industry, both on the line back in college, and also doing marketing for family-owned neighborhood spots, as well as fine dining groups like Dinex. I'm joined today by an incredible selection of panelists. I'm really delighted to introduce Chef Douglas Keane of Cyrus, industry veteran and host popular podcast Hospitality Bites, Colleen Silk. She is here representing the Burnt Chef Project. And we've got Mary Frances Walsh. She is the executive director of NAMI, which stands for the National Alliance of Mental Illness. All of us here have had significant firsthand experience, either witnessing or living out some of the harsh realities that come with working in the hospitality industry. So we're here today to represent just a few perspectives on how to create a better environment within your own restaurant. The goal is for you guys to walk away with actionable steps that you can implement today that don't need a big budget and don't need a huge HR team in place. We want to make this simple, accessible, and effective for everybody. Okay, on that note, let's go ahead and kick things off. All right, so Chef Doug, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Course. So now you've made a name for yourself with cooking. You know, you have accolades, including 2 Michelin stars, 4 stars from San Francisco Chronicle, James Beard Award for Best Chef Pacific. You've been listed in Gourmet's Top 50, lots of accolades. But more recently, you're becoming pretty well known for turning the economic model of restaurants on its head so that you can prioritize your employees. Can you describe a little bit about that journey and how it's come into play with Cyrus?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And I think I'd rather be, if my legacy is anything, I think I'd rather be the latter part of that. If there's going to be a legacy, those stars are fleeting and less important as we keep going on. It came about really from just witnessing the dysfunction over the last 10 years or so, or even longer of my career, that I didn't really understand what was happening, but it's a very dysfunctional business. There's immense burnout, low profits, high turnover, and none of it made sense. But when you're in the middle of the rat race on that hamster wheel, I don't think you necessarily are able to get back and look at it. So I had a little break about 10 years where I thought about how I was going to reopen this restaurant. And first thing I wanted to change kind of the dining concept, but most importantly to me was changing the economic factors, but not only from just an employee perspective, but it's to make it more profitable in the end as well. The longer you have people with you and the more they can do for you, the better your business is going to be. So I just looked at it from a math equation, really, that how many people do I need how much can I pay them, and get them to do each other's jobs so that we have less people, but I don't want to sacrifice the end product as well. So we talked about a true living wage where everyone made over $75,000. We talked about getting to a place where they had benefits. We talked about having 4-day work weeks, all those things that I watched, like the socioeconomic factors that affected people every day seem to have their toll. So could we alleviate that? I'm not a doctor, not a psychologist. I don't understand the mental stuff as well. But I do realize most of the times I've been in stressful crises, it's been because of something about socioeconomic realities. And so I wanted to alleviate that as much as possible. And then also just changing the dynamic of the high testosterone, energy laden kitchen, having it more thought out and engineered.
Right. So kind of rethinking that brigade system, rethinking the fact that we're putting, pressure on the restaurant to stay open 7 days a week, as many rest services as possible, and ultimately leading to really quick burnout and turnout.
Yeah, make it more of a respectable career where I mean everyone else gets 2 days off, and Colleen and I were talking right before that she had to beg for 2 days off, and I was just like, well, wait a minute, what about 3 days off? Why can't we do this? And so we've made some pretty big progress and done it, and it's actually working. Which is the coolest thing about it. And you have to set the culture from the start as well to get everyone to buy into it. Because I have cooks who clear as much food as they plate some nights. Have waiters who help do prep and plate family meal and help us pick up during the service. And so it's about rethinking everything, but I think it's time.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. We'll definitely come back and talk more about the socioeconomic aspect of it through the course of the discussion today. Colleen, you host a show called Hospitality Bites. You've been in the industry a long time. We've actually worked together, old coworkers. Yes. And you address topics like burnout and boundaries a lot. Mm-hmm. What is the most prevalent struggle that you're finding hospitality workers are facing right now from a mental wellness perspective?
So the biggest thing is that the industry addressed sustainability when it came to food a number of years ago, but it never really was addressed when it came to your staff. And what does that mean to sustain staff? Whether that's their hours they work, similar to what Doug was saying, how do we fix that? And because people are less tolerant of doing the 15-hour, 16-hour shifts and getting people to want to work has been really hard for a lot of my industry friends. Getting people back in the groove of this can be a livable job. This can be a fun job. But we've all kind of gone in the extremes. Some of us that are senior staff, we've had the extreme of you make $100 in tips, then you go out and spend $100, you chase the high of drinking, partying, we start it all over again. So that living, sustaining your own mental health is just non-existent. So a lot of us, and what we've been talking about is how can we address it? How can we still have fun? How can we make work feel like a real job where you're not feeling bad about yourself if you didn't make $20 off that tip or off that table or things like that? And really addressing the elephant in the room and not making it so taboo to have feelings or emotions when you walk in the door. Because we're like actors. We put on a show every night, snap, the curtain goes up and we're on, but a lot of us have things going on in our personal lives and we're not allowed to have any feelings. It's all about the customer and their experience. So how do we balance that? And how can we have simple rules and protocols in place to address if someone's in a crisis? Or are we doing post check-ins versus just like pre-shifts and things like that? And it's really turning the tide of how can we make this sustainable for our servers, front of house, back of house, managers, owners. So we all feel like we're doing a job that we love because so many of us are so passionate about it. I mean, I love this industry and I want to see people succeed in it and feel healthy and not have the burnout. No pun intended.
Absolutely. And actually, that's a perfect segue into why Mary Frances is here with us today, because Mary Frances, you've been with NAMI for 8 years now. And I know that it's the National Alliance for Mental Illness, but it's not necessarily, all about mental illness and being on that spectrum. It's also just about encouraging wellness, especially in workspaces. And I think to Colleen's point, when working in hospitality, you do sort of feel like you have to leave your emotions at the door. And in fact, that used to be the hero's journey in hospitality, right? Thinking back to the Bourdain days of really embracing that and, no crying on the line, go sit in the walk-in if you need to. So, tell us what, in your estimation, is the biggest struggle that you think hospitality workers face, and how are some of NAMI's efforts helping to support that?
I think socioeconomic considerations are huge. I think that it is expensive to live today. It is hard to find affordable housing. it is hard to find affordable childcare. And I think it's important to remember that everybody has a family life, no matter what that family looks like. It can different compositions, but when your family or someone in your family is not doing well, could be a teenager struggling with depression and anxiety. It could be an adult child who has a mental health condition, or yourself as an adult, just not feeling up to par. We all have a need to recognize that our mental health is just as important as our physical health. And when we come to work, we spend probably more hours at our jobs than we do in our home life for many of us. And life doesn't cease to exist. So those challenges that we're dealing with on the home front are carrying over into the work environment. And it means that we need to be able to be comfortable in expressing our emotions and feelings. It means that managers need, I think, to be trained to recognize when someone is not doing well, to recognize the signs of stress, of burnout, whether or not that leads to a diagnosable mental health condition. I mean, that's possible. And sometimes there are employees who do experience a mental health challenge and even a crisis. So managers should be informed about local resources, how to refer somebody. And I think that offering workers flexibility, the ability to take a break if they need to step away, to balance their feelings, to create an environment where stigma is not tolerated. So it is not okay to use words like crazy or schizo or so OCD. It's just not okay, because if somebody lives with one of those conditions or has a family member who lives with one of those conditions, those are very, very hurtful statements, and it keeps somebody in the closet from being able to talk about the mental health challenges that maybe their family is experiencing. We need to get to a place where we can feel comfortable talking about our mental health, just like our physical health. And to know where to reach out for help if it's needed.
Absolutely. That's powerful. We do want to share with our attendees that we do have free, accessible resources that we will be posting about towards the end of the webinar. You will also get an email, and those will be able to guide you towards places where you can get training for your staff, where you can understand more about mental health in the workplace, and where you can even have access to hotlines should you need them. So, Mary Frances, thank you for that. Let's circle back a little bit to the socioeconomics, because that seems to be the biggest practical barrier to making some of these changes. So, Doug, you mentioned that you were sort of rethinking how many employees you'd need and working backwards into sort of a profit model. Can you explain a little more about that?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's honestly pretty simple. We talked about what can you live on up here? What is a wage you can make? Not just like a living wage from the government dictated, but a true living wage, like a career wage is what we try to call it. And we came to the conclusion just by looking around and knowing the area that $75,000 was enough that you could live here. It's not super comfortable, but it is, you're able to afford rent. If as long as we were doing health insurance, it was helpful, and you could afford to eat and do some other stuff. So that's where we just drew the line. We just said, okay, we've got to figure out how to make sure everyone makes $75,000, and how do we do that? And basically, the first Cyrus had, I want to say, 56 employees. And some were making in the hundreds of thousands of dollars because of service and tips, and some in the kitchen were making $30,000. And the front of house staff would stay for 8 to 10 years. We couldn't get rid of someone if we wanted to. The back of house staff, would be gone in a year just because they get burnt out, which is, I think, a great phrase. I don't think it's cliche at all. I think it's like prevalent. So we just said, how many people can we do? Like, how many can we afford if we're going to pay them that much? It came to about 20, 22 people. Is what we realized we could do. We said, all right, that's our work model. We're going to be able to pay this many people that much money. And then how do we engineer it back to make it work for that? And the only way it was able to do it was to cross train people so they did other people's jobs. There's a lot of time that the kitchen is busy and the front is doing nothing, and vice versa. You put out a bunch of food. Well, if you're searing a scallop and there's no one to run it, but you can actually run it to the table. Most of the people that work here like to be really busy the entire night, right? It's kind of, we're all kind of adrenaline junkies in a certain way. So having that downtime isn't something that they actually want. So we have a 10-hour day basically, and everyone's pretty busy during the whole time, but they all help each other out. So they do each other's jobs. So it's just a more efficient engineered system. It was that simple. And it wasn't just, it was also to kind of change the paradigm about restaurant investing. It's because if 8 to 10% is a good month in certain months, it's really hard to track investors because it's a notorious business for going belly up very quickly. And most people invest in restaurants just to get a reservation or to support someone that they love or like. And it's just, like, this industry kind of needs to be brought into the modern age where it's a healthy, respectable industry for a number of reasons. And that way people that have worked their butts off all their life actually want to have an idea to open a place. They could actually find investors because it's not so risky. So let's not, I don't want to do 10% profits. That's not a good month. That's a bad, slow January. We should still make money. But we did it, and we figured out how to like maybe make 30 to 40% like most industries. And so that's our goal. So it was profit driven. One of the articles came out, so he's putting employees over profits. They don't have to like fight each other. Like they can actually work together, and I think that's the way we need to look at it. And I'm also trying to figure out how to bring in other partners out there that they kind of make their living off the backs of the restaurant. Like for instance, like I've been speaking to Sonoma County about possibly putting together a retirement plan. How do we do this? Because these guys now make some money, but they don't have a lot of financial services. And I want them to be able to work 20 years here. I would love that. And so at the end, they'd have a little pot of retirement, which we're not able to do yet. Maybe we will, but it'd be really powerful if you could get the entire county to back it. Same thing, like you guys are, Talk is supporting this, which is pretty incredible. You guys make money off the industry. You're giving back. Well, what about people like Yelps and Michelin's? What if Michelin provided tires for a bunch of restaurant workers for a year or stuff like that? Like, can we leverage our industry to do stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a great thought. Colleen, you've been in senior management and hospitality for years now. How
Yes.
do you see this type of model translating to a bigger organization? For example, you were with the Berghoff. That was a large team.
Yes. Exactly to his point about what do you need to operate your business effectively, efficiently, and we're not driving each other, up the wall. But the cross training is major. So many people are, oh, this is my job, this is where I belong, so I will never go to the back and I'll never go to the front, right? It's like this weird, I don't know, be this like dividing wall in our industry. I don't know what it is, but it's just the norm. So being able to have people do different jobs, think of them as any other business. If you work in an office building, I hope that you can answer the phone, help someone around the building, like simple tasks. Running food is such a simple thing. It sounds simple, but people are like unwilling to do it, to drop a plate of food. So if you can cross train people to do similar jobs, but their priority be back of house or front of house, you're also creating this like team environment, right? Where you're not so much against each other. The pay, I mean, my head was blown when you're talking about the pay for your staff, because that's just not the norm. People are working 2 or 3 jobs, waiting tables, hoping to, pay their bills, send their kids to school. And to take that and alleviate the stress for your staff is, I mean, kudos, because it's life-changing for us. Like I'm a mother, having a livable wage that makes me feel like I'm doing something and it's important. And I feel like, oh, wow, my boss supports me. He's like, in this with us. I think is great. And if bigger businesses can kind of understand that, like the bottom line obviously is important, but what about your staff's bottom line? How are they walking out if you're at the end of the day? How are they feeling about themselves? Are they going home to a safe environment? Are we helping create a safe environment while they're also here? I mean, those are 5 major things. And I think there's several restaurant groups that could take a note to that, because making millions of dollars is wonderful. But if your staff and your bussers are making way below that, then there's an issue, right? Something's not matching up. And I mean, totally in all of that. I love cross training. I love supporting your staff from all aspects. And to Mary Frances' point, talking about managers being able to address issues and things like that. That goes into training your front of house in all aspects, right? Like if we can train people to have crisis management, first aid management, simple things like that, and that's like built into like their job offer. Those are life skills they also can take should they choose to move on to somewhere else, right? Like it's so much bigger than just being a front of house manager or running the back of house. I could talk about this all day, so I'm not going to, but it could be so easily translated. People just took the time to listen, like, what are people looking for? How are they looking to survive and like enjoy life, and instead of just like fighting through life, like a lot of us industry people feel like we're fighting a lot, right? So um yeah, I believe that there's room for improvement for everybody, and taking a business model where you put your staff's priorities and your priority and blend them together is huge.
Yeah.
I'll also add on the cross training, and an unforeseen benefit was the pride that the back of house people had never run food before and gotten to see a guest's reaction when they dropped down a dish. And
Mhm.
for them, and it was really awkward to get them trained up to do it, right? And I didn't want to do it. And I'm in front of people all the time. But these guys, it's amazing. I had a couple of people come back to me after the first couple of weeks, and they're like, "Chef, you should have seen their face when we put the risotto down in front of them." And I was like, "Wow!" It's the same thing with the front of house people when they get to plate food with us or help make a family meal or do some prep.
Mhm.
They're all, at the core, hospitality is about people taking care of other people. So just figuring out how we forgot to take care of our own. I think it's time we start to figure out to do that. But the inherent pride that they see from doing other jobs is really, really fun.
That is such an incredible point, because I was actually going to ask, doesn't the idea of cross training lead to perhaps a little bit of burnout if people are choosing to manage multiple tasks? Like, Mary Frances, you're sort of shaking your head. Tell me a little
I
bit.
think it would only make the job more interesting.
Right.
I mean, boredom certainly with doing repetitive tasks again and again and again have to lead to boredom. And I think that, the World Health Organization estimates that there's $1 trillion cost annually due to productivity related to mental health, which is not necessarily a severe mental health condition, but it's a huge spectrum. But there is nothing that can make a company more productive than happy employees. And I don't want to belittle that word, but I mean somebody that's getting satisfaction from what they are doing, feeling like they are part of a team, feeling like there's a purpose for what they do. So I think that's huge. And from a NAMI perspective, we recognize a business is a business. You need to be productive. We need to ensure that we continue to be able to pay our employees. And everybody needs to earn a living. I can't compliment Doug enough. The power of ensuring a decent annual income, even if it's not as much as some people would like, is powerful. When you're not stressing over how you're going to make your rent or mortgage payment, when you're not stressing over families, especially, there are many Latinx workers in our community, where in Sonoma County, we have 29% of the community is Latinx. And we have many, many families living in multiple families in a single household. That is very stressful. And that's because they can't afford more. So I think it's a powerful thing to enable people to feel like they don't have to stress constantly about affording to live.
Also, Sabrina, there's an added benefit to the restaurant. Like when people are sick, when your meat cook calls out and he's the only person, or he or she is the only person that can cook meat, it's stressful.
Mhm.
But when someone can jump in, and pick up that job, it's like you don't have to worry. Like restaurant people don't want to call in sick, and they should be able to call in sick when they're sick. They should stay home, and we should be able to rest and get better. But it's an industry where you go, unless you're limping, you should go in. So I think that's one added bonus. Like one thing we did is, instead of having a bartender out in the bar, we made it a station in the kitchen and trained a few people to make the drinks. And so that way they're only making drinks when people want drinks. And our cocktail program is relatively small for the 48 people we do each night. So basically I've got 2 or 3 people that can do that station, but the other time they're helping running food, cooking, plating, that type of stuff. So there's actually an added bonus to the restaurant, was my point.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, there's an anxiety that most managers or owners and operators have is when somebody calls out, because it's this domino effect of, oh, what are we going to do? Because it affects every service. If it's a kitchen person or front of house, because you have to do this like quick pivot. Okay, well, if we don't have this person working salads, then maybe should we like shrink the salad station slightly tonight? Then it affects what our menu offering is. It's like, it's a very fine line. So, I mean, that's where the cross training, I think, is so important. Bartenders, I mean, should know how to run food. I can't tell you how many bartenders won't walk from behind the bar to go do something, but they expect everybody to bring their food to them. So it's so simple to have cross training, because it alleviates that stress of, oh, I can't call out because if I call, then I'm not going to have a server. Like, we shouldn't have to worry about taking a sick day, but it's so taboo. You feel incredibly uncomfortable calling out. It's just, we're short staffed right now in the industry as it is. So you feel like you have an allegiance to your boss or your company. So taking a time off is a lot of people don't feel comfortable doing that. And that shouldn't be normal. You should feel comfortable taking time for yourself or your family when you have to prioritize. We are the priority. At the end of the day, our life is the priority. And if you work for a company that believes the same things, it's, a perfect match. So yeah, the call out makes things very, very stressful for everybody.
Yeah, we have a phrase we like to use at Talk. We like to empower restaurants. We're all about restaurant empowerment. We want to empower restaurants to drive revenue and build better businesses. But also, I'm hearing this phenomenal theme of empowering your staff, your team, to embrace their lives and embrace their humanity. Oftentimes, we talked about this earlier, humanity gets pushed to the side. It's not only just about emotion, but it's also the little things, like the people that work in hospitality are the ones that miss the most birthdays and the most holidays. It's sort of this like very sacrificial industry, but it doesn't have to be that way at all. This is a good way of starting to change that. How do you think, in terms of welcoming emotion in the restaurants, it's been taboo in the past pretty much, right? What are some ways that managers, owners, and even people, running the kitchen, how can they set the stage to encourage, welcome, and support emotion in the workplace?
I
I'd be
think
happy.
sorry. I just would say I think it's partly by modeling. Managers need to be able to express themselves. If they're having a bad day, to be able to say that. That doesn't mean they dominate their behavior in a way that makes it miserable for everybody else, but to be open about feeling stressed, feeling pressured. That's a very human expression. And if managers don't share that, then you are messaging out that it's not okay to share that individually. So I think modeling behavior is super important.
To Mary Frances' point, one thing at the Burnt Chef in our trainings, we talk about having a wellness program when you onboard someone with your staff. It can be very simple of, if you're having a bad day, is there something that we should know, or do you want to have a keyword to come speak to us? Are there certain triggers that we need to be aware of? Are you an NA? Are you an AA? Are there certain situations that make you uncomfortable? So this is as they're joining the team, so they know that your priority is them, and that you already are thinking about, if something were to go wrong, that you have their best interest at heart, because there's this concept of the customer's always right, correct? So say a customer's belittling you, you're afraid to go tell the manager, it might be a triggering moment for a staff member or a manager. I mean, I've had moments where I've bawled my eyes out because a person took me down. But knowing that there's a plan and protocol in place, simple one-page sheets of when they're onboarding, of rules and regulations, and not waffling on those. So say there's a 0 drinking policy, but the manager's out passing shots to the front of house staff and you're in the back, it's very confusing, right? Well, we can't drink, but they're drinking. So if I drink, I could lose my job. So there has to be clear cut rules, a healthy rules put in place, identifying shift meals, when those happen, all sorts of things. So there is this time to breathe upon arrival. There's breathing upon the end of the shift. Like I said, the post shifts are so important. But putting it in a simple Word doc and giving it to your staff when they sign on just shows that you care and that there's plans in place. It sounds silly and kind of maybe taboo to have like a keyword or code word if something triggers you, but it could save someone's life. It's something like, when people order a drink at a bar, that means someone's making them uncomfortable. The bartender knows sometimes those drinks. It's that important, because you may not know, they might have been triggered when they walked in the door and they need like a moment to cool off. Having things like that in place are very simple. You don't need HR to do it. It's just you and the manager on onboarding, and same with the manager and the owner. It should be very similar training. And then you can also offer free training through the Chow organization. The Burnt Chef has training, really to get you set up for success, so you feel empowered to make your staff feel safe when they're there at work.
I love that.
I mean, I grew up cooking in the 90s in New York City, where, if your girlfriend dumped you, the chef would buy you a shot at the end of the night. That was the mental health. And if your dad got diagnosed with cancer, it was like they chip in for a hooker and an 8-ball. I mean, that was the mental health like support back then. I moved out to California and worked for an amazing woman at Jardiniere, Tracy Desjardins, and I learned how to treat people. How important the staff was, and she exposed me to that. And I think having people like that and actually think about people's lives being better is really important. So to set that example, I feel very much like I have to pay it forward, because I learned more from the bad people, but when I finally found a few good people, it was pretty amazing to see how they like to treat people the right way.
Do you have any protocol in place at Cyrus?
Protocol for what exactly?
Like Colleen was mentioning, an onboarding process that includes concepts of mental health.
I wouldn't say there's like a mental health direction right now. It's more about we've been fostering everything as far as a healthy environment, but we do check in with people and talk to them. And when people have rough days, we pull them aside and talk to them. And we've counseled one-on-one and things like that. I don't know that I'm fully equipped to actually handle real mental health issues. We definitely we've referred people to a few outside sources in time, but all of these types of resources that you're offering, I think are pretty important to put in place for people. We try to set the culture from the start, right? Because we're 1 year old in September, and we've got everyone in on the same philosophy, which is really important. It's hard to change culture. Like Colleen was saying, like bartenders don't want to run food. That is so ingrained, but you can change that, but it's really hard to change it midstream, because but when you bring people on, you're like, this is our culture. You're supporting people. You're not screaming. You're not yelling. You're not fighting. You're not drinking here. Then you can get so I think it's more about setting the culture is what we've done.
Yeah, it reminds me of the bear when, God, what's his name? Carmi comes in and the place is all chaos, but slowly, he's just sort of persistent. He doesn't lecture or anything, but that persistence, and people start to catch on like, oh, this is actually better. And yeah, I think there's a lot about that show that we can learn from sometimes. On the topic of managers supporting the team, I wonder, Mary Frances, do you have any tips on how to support managers? Because often people in leadership are the ones that are struggling the most, because not only are they managing their home life, their emotions, but then they have to manage their team as well. And I know for me, I've been in situations where I feel like if I don't present a perfect facade, then my team is going to feel unsteady.
I think it's training. I think it's the more informed your managers can be about recognizing a failure of mental health, knowing resources that they can refer their staff out to. They don't have to handle all of the problems, but it is very helpful for them to know in their local area whom they might direct somebody who needs a little more than they can offer. And giving them a platform, I think, to connect with one another, maybe a place to talk about challenges that they've had in managing employees, problems they don't know quite how to handle. Just pretending like those issues don't matter just leads to increased managerial stress. Sometimes you can learn so much by just talking about things with your peers. But I think that giving managers a solid foundation in what does mental illness look like? What is the whole gamut? It can be something from just difficult emotions to a full-flung diagnosable condition. And being aware of the signs and symptoms. There are plenty of opportunities. I mean, we offer training, but there are many organizations that do. And offering that to managers, I think, is a great first step. We recently had somebody from a club, is interesting, contact us because actually they were burglarized early in the morning, and an employee went in early and encountered the burglars and was not hurt. Burglars left, but the person was so traumatized that they just felt like they really needed some kind of mental health support. So we just walk them through the first steps for how do you find help. But it can run the gamut of people's reactions, in which they may need something more than just their manager can offer. But knowing how to tap into that is really important.
Right.
When Colleen was talking about service check-ins, I've never, it was just like a light bulb went off. I've never even thought about that because you're so happy to be done and get out. But yeah, the stress is during the service, right? And before anyone goes out and, drinks too much or whatever, it's actually a great idea. Thanks for saying that, Colleen.
The post-service check-in is something I've been thinking about the last several months during my Hospitality Bites journeys, because we're so gung-ho before service starts and prepping our staff that for some reason, when the shift ends, we're all doing everything to get out of there. And like you said, everyone's most likely going out drinking or partying. You're now putting a depressant on top of the anxiety that built all night, right? So it's going to sleep for me. I will speak for myself. I don't sleep well after a night of service. I have a very hard time. I cannot turn it off. And I found that if I drank after work, it was just amplifying that for me. And I had no one to talk to because I'm doing the drawers at the end of the night. I'm doing disciplinary actions, writing notes for tomorrow. And then when I get home, it's just me, right? So there is no kind of common conversation with everybody, front of house or back of house, just like, hey, how'd that go? Man, table 12 was wild, right? Like just kind of putting it out there. I don't want to bash any customers, but some of you can drive us crazy. But we have to be able to say sometimes these emotions, or it's just going to really, really drag you down, and it's exhausting. And the managers sometimes take home a lot of it, or the executive chef, they're coming home with the last bit of it. They're ones locking the door. And I think it's so important that we just have these little post check-ins. Like, I'm not saying you have a round of shift drinks, everybody, but how about like a post shift meal? Like, I'm a big dessert proponent. Put up the leftover desserts and let's all sit and chat, just to really feel like you can breathe when you go home and you're in your safe space.
Yeah. I want to bring up the shift drink because there's so much conversation around that whole concept at this point. How do you guys feel about the shift drink and what it
I allow zero drinking here whatsoever. I was part of restaurants my entire career where they would give you 2 beers or whatever drinks you wanted, and it was just a slippery slope, and it just got abused, and it just wasn't healthy. This is a place to work, and then there's times to sit down and have a meal, like, and maybe that's where you do some wine education and stuff. But if you want to go out to a bar, go out to a bar, and you should be able to do that. But I think my personal opinion, I've never allowed it for the last 15 or so years, just because it's such a slippery slope.
Interesting.
Shift drinks, I think, depends. I worked in several places, some that allow it, some that don't. And for those that do allow it, the crossover from shift drink becomes an active drinking while you're working. It's the lines get blurred because you're like, hey, they're having a shift drink. Let's do a shot with them while they're counting their money. We're still behind the bar. And while I'm not putting anyone down that allows shift drinks, but are you ringing those in? Are those being monitored? Because at the end of the day, this is your liability also, right? Like, you're allowing them to have an alcoholic beverage on the clock, potentially, if they're not clocked out. You need to be doing it the safe way, the healthy way. If you are going to allow it, be responsible owners, be responsible managers. I, for one, don't think shift drinks should be allowed. Especially what happens if you allow the shift drinks when the doors are closed and the lights are turned on and now it's just the staff. It really can lead to some dangerous things. And I've said it before, you're adding a depressant to anxiety, and it really can be dangerous for some people. And you may not know what someone's going through at home. Right. Or if they're, working through their sobriety, but everyone else is having a shift drink, clean cut. Let's enjoy our shift. Let's everybody get home safely, I think, is like what we should be focusing on. And putting that money maybe towards something else.
Yeah. I love the idea of a post-service, snacks, just, maybe a late dinner. I would go for that. I know that it's tough. I think one of us mentioned on here for restaurants that are already established and already have these practices in place, to then shift their mentality. Mary Frances, do you have any advice for restaurants that perhaps have shift drinks pretty ingrained in their existing process, but want to present other opportunities or perhaps even remove it altogether?
Well, I'm not in this industry, so I want to clarify that would be hard for me. But I think being honest about the reasoning behind it for employees and saying, you care about your employees and you want, they are the face between you and your customers, your clients. And if they're not doing well, if they're not happy, they're going to present that vision of themselves of unhappiness or stressed or anger to your clients, and it's going to impact your customers' experience. It only seems to me to make sense that you want to take a step back and reframe. Just be honest, be open about your goal, and making your environment a better place to be an employee in, and it's in the long run going to be a better place for your clients.
And there's not one place that has shift drinks that hasn't had some problems. Can guarantee you. So you can just point to those and say, this is, we're changing our policy and this is why. And, I think, and then you just have to hold to it. You have to get buy-in as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good sort of rule of thumb for any existing restaurant that wants to implement these new wellness practices. It's all about being honest, being open, and ultimately reassuring everyone on the team that it's going to be for everybody's benefit.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. I do want to, there were a couple of things. So one thing that kept coming up in conversation was dealing with customers. We've all been there. We've all had the difficult table. And sometimes that can get very challenging and very stressful. And, Colleen, you said that you've gone bawling. I know I have. What can we do? I mean, this idea of the customer is always right. It is shifting. That is shifting. But Doug, you're shaking your head. How do you deal with those scenarios?
I mean, someone doesn't like something and they're a little difficult with the wines or the food, no problem. But when people there's a line that people cross, it's usually alcohol related, right? I mean, I could probably say 70% of the time they're not just jerks, they're drunk or nasty. To me, it's I have no problem walking someone out the door. I'll just refund their money and I'll walk them out the door when they cross that line. And you kind of have to do that in front of the staff because the staff shouldn't have to do it. We are so ingrained with just putting up with abusive behavior. It just doesn't need to be. People don't need to abuse. You can still give great service, even if someone's not 100% happy. So I think there's that line when people cross. I seem to get to it I get to a lot quicker than most, like my business partner, Nick, the front of house guy. I get there quicker than he does. But we've also realized like there's times we just have to say, sorry, we're not going to serve you anymore. You need to leave. And, the staff doesn't need to put up with that. So it's awkward, but we're not here. We're in the service business, not servants.
Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing.
Great line.
People forget that we are here because we love what we're doing. And I doubt if someone came into your place of work and crossed that line, would you allow them to sit and enjoy the rest of their meal? The answer is no, because you have boundaries at your workplace. We have the same. Our staff, we say they're our family. We're going to protect them like family. So if you're inappropriate, you think that you know what's best, I can tell you right now, there's going to be a manager and owner that does not think the same way. They're going to stand behind their staff. The disrespect level with some people, I just speak from experience. You have to learn to like hold in the emotion at the time, right? Like you feel like you're in a break because they're cutting you down or whatever they're saying. But when you do walk them out the door, to Doug's point, your staff sees how much that you put up with to keep them safe, because it's also a safety thing. Because one person's going to say the wrong thing and it can cause a whole slew of problems. You don't want this to be a hostile environment. You want your staff to see that you have their back, even if you're taking the heat, a lot of it, which I've had to eat crow from several people. And I had choice words when they walked out the door, but I didn't want them to see me hot in the moment, right? It just kind of builds that foundation of this is a family that we're working together. Mary Frances said it, we spend more time with them than we do with our own families. We need to make this a safe, hospitable place. It's hospitality. This is not come, crap all over us because you're having a bad day. Now you just are shitty, sorry, because your steak is overcooked. Like, we'll get you a new one, buddy. Calm down. Like, it so doesn't need to go to that place, and people don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. In my head, I'm like, you try making the perfect steak with 10 other orders on file. Yeah, that's definitely true. I do want to turn to question answers in a couple minutes, but I'm curious, just taking a step back, obviously, this sort of conversation has become more prevalent in our industry since the pandemic.
Mhm.
Sort of forced us to kind of reevaluate everything across all industries. Where do you think the industry is headed towards? Do you think that we're already starting to see a pretty significant shift? I know we have a lot of work to go, but where do you feel we are in this moment, Doug?
I think we're at a paradigm where we are switching. We're talking about it, and people are doing actionable things. And so I do think we're making progress. I think we need to kind of dream bigger. I started off at $75,000. I'd like to get everyone up to six figures. I'd like there to be a retirement fund, 3 weeks of vacation paid. I'd like it to be a respectable industry. And I think the more change that we can kind of push forward and talk like this, I think it's really valuable. So yeah, I think we're getting there. It's also really hard to make change, really hard. So I think it's going to be slow steps.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to be embarrassed to be working in the industry. I'll say it out loud. I was a server, and when people come into the restaurant, see me waiting tables, I would get embarrassed. Like, oh, they're off at college and they're doing well. But I made a huge career for myself, and I absolutely adore this industry. But I met my breaking point, and it was a mix of personal and professional. And I took a step back, and I was like, why am I putting up with some of this stuff? And why are we not talking about these uncomfortable things? Because I've lost friends now in the industry because the pandemic did a number on them. I mean, it just really, the issues were always there, right? The pandemic just amplified it. And there's a handful of us that are making enough noise that we're really starting to see people wanting to implement health changes. There's several organizations now, like obviously I work for an organization that started in the UK and it's working its way into the US. And it's okay to talk about the things that make us uncomfortable, because our industry should be held to the same standards that any other Forbes industry is held at, right? Like, they get these high regards. And I think, to Doug's point, you have these stars right on your wall, and they mean something to the dining customer because that's what they see on television sometimes. But the work that goes into it is just as important, and having a healthy lifestyle, a healthy place to go, is what we should be talking about. And the stars are just a bonus to it, right? I mean, people love what we're doing, but how about we enjoy it every single day and not just the night that we receive the award or whatever it may be. And I'm proud to be being a loud person in the room talking about it, because I want people to enjoy this. I want the next generation of service industry people to love it just as much as I did, and not be embarrassed that we wait on tables. I love talking. This is what I'm doing, right? But it shouldn't be frowned upon, and it should be a wonderful place, and people wanting to come to work.
Yeah. And from an overarching standpoint, Mary Frances, how do you feel the stigmas against mental illness, mental wellness? How do you feel that conversation is evolving in general across the country for us?
I think we've made strides during the pandemic. I mean, the terms mental health, mental illness have become much more common, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a long way to go, because people who are embarrassed to reach out for help don't ask for help. And that can only exacerbate existing problems. Sometimes, we have a tremendous overdose death rate and overdose rates due to opioid abuse. We still have problems with alcohol, and we still have high rates of suicide. And all of those are clear worry factors. And it begins with everybody feeling like they have dignity, which I think has been spoken by both Doug and Colleen here. It is so important. And the ability to recognize when something isn't right in your feelings and know where to reach out for help, and feel comfortable about doing that. And it's only when we make talking about our mental health commonly acceptable that we're going to overcome stigma.
Hear, hear. On that note, let's switch over to questions from the audience. If you have a question and you haven't submitted it yet, just a reminder that there is a button below Q&A. You can just submit it right there and we'll get to it. Doug, we have a couple questions for you specifically to start off. So from Nicole, how do you get your employees on board with this new mindset?
Sure. It starts from the first interview. Well, I mean, a lot of people that apply have already read about what we're doing, but it starts when we talk to them, when we sit down, interview them, talk about their career, but then talk about the philosophy that we're setting. And it's basically like telling them this is a very different, there is no front and back of house. There's a team. And here's what you're going to do. If you're not comfortable running food, we're going to get you there, but you have to buy into it. So it's full disclosure, basically, and just setting the culture right from the start. And then, honestly, most of them stage a night or hang out for a night, or they spend some time with us and they actually get it and they love it. They're like, wow, this is, I mean, we get comments all the time from our clients like, your staff is so happy, and it's literally the best. I'd rather them tell me that than like how great the risotto is.
Yeah, that's great. I do want to point out, obviously, we have some resources up on the screen for you guys. We've also shared some websites in the chat itself, so please feel free to copy paste those, and we will be sending a roundup via email as well. We did get a question asking about onboarding forms and such from the Burnt Chef Project, and you can find all of that in their free resource link right there. Another question that we received, so for businesses that hire high school or college students, typically they're not expecting, you know, 75,000. What do you recommend for base pay?
Is that for Doug or for me?
It's just for either of you.
I would also say different areas, geographic areas, have different needs. First of all, this was very specific to what I thought, and honestly, I'd like it to be higher. But I think that we do have some part-time, or we don't right now, but we did have some part-time, but we just picked a fair wage. But just, yeah, I don't know if I'd make a difference between what the bare minimum is you need to live versus how old you are or whether you're in high school or college. I'm not sure I would. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
I agree with what Doug's saying. You know, our industry is also about experience, right? It's a lot like any other job. Some places may not expect you to have a lot of experience, so their wages may reflect that because it's going to most likely be part-time. Especially for high school kids, you know, there's also laws we have to follow if you're not 18, and you have to make sure that we're getting paperwork from your parents or your school allowing you to work. So a lot of things play into that factor. And, you know, we talked about the shift drinks. That's something we've talked about. We got a lot of younger people that work in the industry now that are not of age. So if shift drink is an incentive for them to work there, what are we doing for the of age children or kids? They're kids, right? So, you know, a lot of factors need to go into that. And I think it's unique to each business of how they're operating. And if they're a tipped employee, salaried employee, all sorts of things. And if you're full-time or not.
Right. I also want to say, I think this is a great time to talk about, it's never too early to start training people on financial wellness. So if you are giving a high school or college student this living wage, this is the perfect time for them to start thinking about, okay, what can I do to make sure that I am set up appropriately? And there are free resources where you can bring in people just to kind of give quick primers on things like investments, retirement. There's so many online apps now where the membership is like $3 and you get unlimited courses for understanding fundamentals of money. So I just think, you know, that's something we can definitely point to as a bonus as well.
I think it's necessary investment to help them manage their money because there's just, you're not taught that skill in cooking school. You're not taught it in your job. And it's, even now that my guys are making more money, some of them don't know how to manage. And
Right.
it's something that's my next project.
Right. I do think there are some apps that offer, I want to say they offer like deals for teams and stuff. And it's all about just like managing budgets, understanding the basics of investing. So yeah, definitely something to look into. And we can certainly look into that on our end as well when we provide follow-up resources. Another question. Okay, we've got some very popular questions. This is for everybody. Do we have techniques that have specifically worked for you when you're shifting an already existing culture? So specific techniques here.
I can speak to that because I was just a part of one.
Yeah.
And something simple, and this is going to go back, and Doug will know what this is the red book. Most restaurants had a red book in management, what meant you check your sales for the night, you write it down, you leave notes for the next manager. That is an easy and effective way to implement today, where you get a red book or a manager book and you start auditing the day, audit how the shift went. Was there any issues with staffing? And then you slowly can start doing these more quote unquote corporate style documents of how your day went. But it also just is an easy transition of, okay, so if I just write how the day was, can be like, hey, it was raining, we were really slow, little low to no covers. That just kind of starts ingraining in your staff. Like, we are going to start taking things seriously. We are monitoring our sales. We are monitoring how the shift is operating, so we can start adjusting staffing levels or other operating hours and things like that. It's a very simple, effective way. Is get a red book, go online and buy one.
I would say probably an orientation, a very serious orientation where you sit everyone down, maybe even bring in a few guests to speak about it, about the culture that you're trying to shift. And then after that, I think it's really important repetition. I'm sorry, repetition and backing yourself up and you're gonna have to change that culture over time. You're gonna want to do it overnight, but you can implement it overnight, but it's gonna take a while to make it cemented.
I think it's developing a culture of reflection, giving the opportunity to voice what went well, what didn't go well, and why, and making that a consistent habit. And maybe you do that at the end of an evening, but it's not just dismissing those thoughts, but honoring them by recognizing them and discussing them as a team.
Yep. We've got several questions about, again, related to manager burnout, leadership burnout. It's so important for them to model, but how do you recommend supporting these leaders?
I think just giving managers an opportunity to be real, to say when they need, maybe they need a mental health day off or an hour away. Giving them the ability to be flexible, to if they need to address a family problem, maybe they have a child or a teenager, somebody that needs a little bit of time or accompaniment to an appointment, whether that be a physician or a mental health counselor, allowing people to do that so that they have the flexibility to be cognizant of what's going on in their own lives. I don't see any other way.
Yeah, I would say like what Mary Frances was saying, the time away, time off is really important. Giving them that support. I also think one thing that we don't do enough is tell people what a good job they did when they did it.
Absolutely.
We're always trying to point out mistakes because we're trying to get better. But positive feedback is like, well, you did a great job tonight, and especially on this and this, I think is really important to take the time to do.
Well said. Everybody glows when they hear
Yeah.
you've done a good job. It's just so important. But it has to be genuine, and
Right.
it can make such a difference.
Like, one thing that I'll say that what Doug's company is doing is that they're off consecutive days in a row.
Mhm.
And when we write schedules for our front of house staff, a lot of us, I do think they're conscious to make sure people have days off, but the managers are usually the ones that kind of get forgotten because we're responsible for everybody, right? So as an owner, as an operator, what Doug has done is created opportunity for everybody to have time away. It is so important to have time away in your personal space. And this is where the owners and operators may not be seen at restaurants a lot, and you only see the GMs or whoever there is running the business. The owners and operators need to step in and like, hey, are you taking time off? When was the last day that you were at home, or were you home for bedtime with your kids? I spoke with a chef recently about this. Getting to be home for life events, like putting your kids down for bed or taking your dogs for a walk in the morning, can make someone's day. And it's important that the owners and operators are also listening to this, that you play a vital role in setting the standards. And if you're not prepared to make adjustments to let everyone have a life outside of it, then maybe you should reevaluate what your business model really is. Because without your staff, you're not going to have a business. And they're the most important key component of your business at the end of the day.
Yeah, we had a related question to that. In a corporate environment, how can this topic be broached with senior leadership? Because of course you don't want them to have a coup, but
I can speak to recently speaking with a business. They were unwilling to recognize that their issue, while financial, was also that their staff was burnt out. And I was the one that broached the subject with them. I said, well, have you done check-ins with your staff? And the goal, they all seem really happy. They're making a ton of money. That's kind of a word that people like, they focus on, but you don't really know what's going on in the intermixing. So as a manager, a front of house employer, back of house, they should feel comfortable enough to say, hey, I'm tired. We need to have this conversation. But if the owners or operators don't see that, they only see money, it's going to be an uphill battle. And if you don't have HR in place, it makes it even harder. But I think that people should feel empowered to speak up for themselves, because no one's going to do it for you if there's not an HR in place. I know that it sounds scary, it's intimidating, but there are resources like the CHOW organization has weekly meetups where you can kind of vent these things out, and people can help give you advice on how to approach those subjects, which I know is not easy for a lot of people. But I think it comes down to if the owner and operator are willing to listen, maybe you should reevaluate where you're currently working as well.
Yeah. Well, I am so sorry to say this, but we are actually 1 minute over time, and we have a ton of super valuable questions. So I want to reassure everyone, if we did not get to your question already, we are going to make sure that we get answers, especially if you wanted to hear from a specific panelist. And we will share all of that with the recap of this webinar, as well as a recording that you can access at any point in time. To Doug, Colleen, Mary Frances, this was absolutely incredible. I am so glad that we are creating space for these conversations. And I think the industry is lucky to have people like you at the forefront of this movement. So thank you so much.
Kudos to you guys for doing this, Sabrina, for
Agreed.
Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, guys, Talk, we are built by restaurants for restaurants, and we give a damn. We want to see the restaurant industry thriving, whether it's creating more revenue and also taking care of your employees, because it does not have to be one or the other, like Cyrus is showing us. And we're very proud to have Cyrus as a customer with Talk. We will share resources, and thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. If you are not a customer with Talk, but you would like to learn more, please visit exploretalk.com/join, or just visit us on social media. Thank you again so much, everybody. Have a great day.